everyone, welcome to week 10 of the Navigating the Design to Manufacture Journey series. I am Daisy Chapman-Chamberlain. I am the Rail Manager at Knowledge Transfer Network, and I'm joined by my co-host Ali McInroy, Chief Exec at Product Scotland, who are partnering with us to bring you these lunchtime events. So this series, for those of you who have already taken part will know this of course, addresses some of the challenges faced by hardware innovators. Today, we're talking around helping innovators navigate the often tricky design to manufacture journey. Specifically, we'll be looking at building supply chains through the move from design into manufacture. At KTN, the journey to manufacture is frequently raised as a key challenge. Manufacturers can be busy, meaning they're slow to respond, or expensive to engage when considering low volume opportunities. Manufacturers also have their own requirements, and it's important to take suppliers' perspective into account, but building strong collaboration as early as possible, ensuring good, consistent communication are keys to great relationships and strong supply chains. In today's session, we'll provide insights into the challenges associated with moving from design to manufacture, which often cause frustration. I will also give people some key information on the things they need to do to consider navigating the process successfully. Today, we have three fantastic speakers who are going to share some thoughts on these topics. We have Joe Ball from the University of Warwick, who's going to give us an overview of the challenges faced by innovators looking to manufacture build supply chains. We have Pete Wood from RS Components, who's going to discuss component selection, scale, obsolescence and prototyping. And we have Julia Moore from Reshoring, who's going to give us an overview of the Reshoring website with a focus on how it can help startup hardware innovators. So for now, I'm going to hand you over to my co-host, Ali McInroy, to welcome you to today's talk.
Thanks, Daisy, and morning all. I'd just like to briefly add my welcome to that of Daisy's. My name's Ali McInroy. I'm the Chief Exec at Technology Scotland. We are an industry association for Scotland's enabling technology sector, and underneath that we run a number of networks, one of which is Product Design Scotland, which is the hat that we're wearing today and the one that we've been wearing as we've partnered with the KTN on this series over the last almost unbelievably 10 weeks. Seems incredible that so much time has passed since we started this. I'll be your chair for this part of the session, and I'll facilitate the Q&A after we've heard from our three speakers. So we do a joint Q&A with our panelists at the end. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. You can submit your questions at any time during the session, and we encourage you to do so. As Anita directed you previously, if you could do that through the Q&A functionality that you'll find at the bottom of your screen, that would be great. Please don't submit questions into the chat function. We use that for kind of technical aspects and the networking bit, and questions tend to get lost within the sheer amount of information that tends to flow through there. So please keep your questions in the Q&A box. It also helps us a lot if your question is directed to a particular panelist. If you could, in some way within your question, identify that helps us when it comes to the Q&A. If your question is more general and you're happy for anyone to answer it, then I'll just pick on someone at the end, basically, and we'll decide who gets to answer that question when it comes to it at the end. So I think that's it by way of intro and housekeeping. So in the interest of time, we'll get cracking, and I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, who's Jay Ball from the University of Warwick. So Jay, I'm going to ask you to start sharing your screen, and then over to you. You're on mute, Jay.
Mute. Hello, everybody. I'm Professor Jay Ball. I work with the manufacturing group at the University of Warwick. And for a long time, we've been really interested in that process of, typical, it doesn't work when we need it to. Have we got screen sharing going on?
We can see everything that's on your screen, Jay.
Yeah, I know. Trying to get rid of. Okay, we got it now. Yeah, my interest really is in sort of technology and small businesses in particular. So I work with the small business support team, but also we do research, and particularly in recent periods, been doing quite a lot of work on entrepreneurship. So we run a master's degree in entrepreneurship, which helps people create new products and services. For example, this is one of the great product ideas that came up as part of our course. So this was somebody who watched a lot of sport, and problems were that particularly he was a motor racing fan, and it's always kind of raining, and I like it raining, and trying to sit there and not kind of damage the eyes or parts of the bodies of people sitting next to you, but also get a clear view. He came up with this idea of an umbrella, rain shader. Now, it seemed like a great idea, but then you get into the problem, well, how can we get it made? So you think, well, umbrellas are not actually that different everywhere else. Maybe we can go and find an existing umbrella maker and go and talk to them, and maybe they can make rain shader. So quite often the first kind of route to this is to go to Alibaba.com, which is probably like the world's largest B2B SME platform, and look for umbrella manufacturers. So for example, here on the screen, there's like over 1,000 people who claim to be able to do custom umbrellas. But when you start talking to them, no, they really can't. All they can really do is to sell you various quantities of their standard designs. So it's not really a good option for people. And if you start then talking to these people to try and get them to do your design, it's a difficult process. We were lucky, we had a kind of Chinese speaker who was able to talk to some of these companies. So it's a path, and one I think is a kind of a common path, but not really appropriate. So what are the kind of processes that we need to really go through? Well, for our umbrella, we have to kind of design or think about what are the sub-assembly parts. So there's the fabric part, there's the handle, there's the struts that support the fabric. So we need to kind of break that down into what are the sub-assemblies. And particularly the big problem we had with that umbrella was the spars that supported the frame of the umbrella, because it needed to stand strong winds, but the shape was unusual. With that particular shape, you needed really kind of reinforced fiberglass material, which is not that common for the umbrellas. And you need to create then from a bill of materials from this part, work out what capabilities are needed to make those bits. And then the hard part, finding suppliers with those capabilities or people who can make those components and are willing to kind of adapt and change. And that can be a long process. It can take you months to sort of go through that process to finally come up with a group of people who could supply you with what you want. So just to illustrate, we have a component, a wheelbarrow, I break it down into what are the sub-assemblies, and then what are the components that make up those sub-assemblies. But behind it all, we can either go and search for somebody who can make us an axle, or we can go and find somebody who makes axles and can make one suitable for us. And that, where do you go and find somebody? Well, luckily, there are kind of lots of support available to help you. And I would really recommend this process of kind of creating your bill of materials and identifying the support. Now, it's good to go and talk to some experts, because there are lots of different options. We talk about make for manufacture, but really the choices can affect the sub-assemblies or the components and the suppliers. So lots of universities and colleges have SME support teams, and they are helpful sources of advice. Knowledge Transfer Network is a good source. Many private companies, you can go to them and they will create a supply network for you to produce your product. I would also just suggest talking to incubators and accelerators, local maker spaces, and growing up more and more neighborhood repair centers. They quite often have good links. Then there are the public agencies who can support you, the catapults, the kind of MAS service, which may be coming back, and people like local enterprise partnerships. Trouble is, it's quite often difficult to get kind of sufficient attention on your product unless it's a service that's specifically designed to kind of support that. Another interesting alternative is to look at open source projects. Almost any product that you think of, including umbrellas, ventilators, windmills, there'll be open source projects which can tell you what are the good sub-assemblies, and proper definition of open source means they all must tell you where the sources of supply possibly are and where you can buy those bits. And then finally, there's business directories, and that's an area that's kind of undergoing quite a lot of change at the moment. Business directories used to be kind of very national, but more and more the trend seems to be that they're going local. So they're good for finding local suppliers, but they all have different amounts of information about a company. It's whatever a company is willing to put up there. And they can't always be good, reliable sources of supply. The local enterprise partnerships are creating a coordinate set of Find It catalogs at the moment, but still they are sparsely populated, let's put it that way. And then there's a number of platforms, and here's one that we built at the University of Warwick, WMCCM, which stands for West Midlands Collaborative Commerce Marketplace. But basically, this contains a listing of companies. So altogether, there's about 14,000 companies on this platform, about 400 of which have been visited and validated, i.e. we validated that what they claim to be good at, they actually are. And there's a process.
Just going to demonstrate some of the features.
There's a process by which you can sort of go through, and in this case, you can go to like a partner search and fill in information about the kind of capability that you're looking for. And these are kind of profiles of some of the companies and their capabilities on the platform, and detailed descriptions of what they're good at, which have been verified independently. And then you can go along and list the capabilities that you want, and also what your preferences are in terms of the locality of these suppliers, their experience in particular markets, their quality certifications. And the system will end up with recommending a supply network for you that you can easily contact. So here at this process, we end up with, through the process quickly, with a suggestion of a group of companies who between them have all the kind of capabilities you need to make your product. There's a number of these growing now, so more and more of these making available. A lot of the trade associations are creating one specially as part of the process. Also 3D printing is an option nowadays, so it's possible that you go on and find suitable 3D printers. And companies like Shapeways kind of provide a complete service for making products, including post-processing and finishing operations. And at kind of the research level, there's quite a lot of work on kind of future virtual factory stuff. So one project that I've worked on in the past is this Imagine one, and the EU has funded quite a few projects on just taking us through the whole process that I've just kind of described through. So I suspect that what we're going to be seeing is some quite radical changes in the process for putting together supply networks and for managing those networks in real time and having visibility as to the flow of goods and services in those networks. So that's kind of my brief really about where we are, where we're going, what the problems are, and the future solutions that might be coming along on that. This is, so that's really kind of what I wanted to say really at this stage. Happy to kind of discuss and answer questions in more detail as we follow on.
Brilliant, thanks Jay for that. We'll move on to Pete in just a second. Pete, if you can start to get yourself sorted in the background to that. In the meantime, I can see that a couple of people are already using the Q&A functionality. That's great. Thanks very much for that. Continue to encourage you to submit your questions through Pete and Julia's presentations as well. But in the meantime, Pete, Design Spark, over to you.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to find the navigation here. So, yeah, so my name's Pete Wood. I work for RS Components. Hopefully, if you've got anything to do with components in terms of electronics, you would have heard of us. I'm going to look at today mainly around design to manufacture when we're looking at the PCB side of things. So PCB, assembled PCBs to get your prototypes, etc. So looking at designing for availability, for production, and for price points as well. So just a couple of quick positioning slides. I've been in the semiconductor business for around 23 years. I've worked across distribution, OEM manufacturers, and I've worked in front of engineers, designing things. I've worked with buyers, contract manufacturers. So I've got a good kind of knowledge around here. So part of today really is about sharing some of my experience there, sort of help you guys along when you're looking to do your applications. Quick positioning around RS Components. So we are the global distribution for engineers. We call ourselves. We have around 500,000 products in our portfolio, 1 million customers worldwide. And we work with about 2,500 major suppliers. So the key thing out of here is I'm part of the Design Spark team, and I'll talk a little bit about that a bit towards the end, but Design Spark basically is an engineering platform. We're a community, we have free design tools. Pretty much anyone who wants to design electronics applications, we have a whole host of material from free tools, design resources, open source reference designs, all that kind of stuff, available free on our platform. So you can go and check that out, and we'll share some of those links later. And we've got about 1 million members globally, and they're primarily design engineers. So just jumping into it then, so the 3 key pillars, let's talk about component selection and availability and obsolescence. Now, obsolescence is a huge, huge problem in our industry. If you think about when you're designing a board, I think the average board has around 200 components on it. It just takes one of those components to go obsolete to cause you a major problem. So just a few pointers really when you're looking at starting a new design and you're looking for components to go in that design. There are quite a few things you should do as a general rule, just to sort of try and limit the risk when you're designing something, and also taking into account how long that product's going to be out there. The average component life cycle is about 8 years before it gets made obsolete. And quite often you get as little as 30 days notice from a manufacturer that it's actually going to go obsolete. So you need to sort of prepare the best you can. So checking this device status in terms, is it recommended for new designs? Is it going end of life? Is there a PCN? That means product change notification. That could be as simple as they've changed the temperature grade to they've changed the pin out, right? Which can cause you all sorts of problems if it's a pin out. End of life, EOL, another thing quite common with manufacturers, they issue them. You get these from when you're researching, check out the manufacturer's websites. When you're looking for components, check out the franchise distribution network, use the internet. They are all good sources to let you know the status of a component. So the last thing you want to do is put something in that's going to go obsolete. Always, always where you can have a viable second dual source. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be in a drop-in replacement. Quite often you can lay your board out to take more than one device, but for your key devices like the microcontrollers or your FPGAs, you really need to make sure that you've got some kind of redundancy. If something goes wrong and you can swap in another part, even if it's just a different speed grade or temperature grade or something that's just got the similar features, it's really wise where you can to make sure you've got that second source just in case there's an issue. And also, when you get into the obsolescence time as well, you get these things called last time buys. So it's always important that, if there is an obsolescence situation and there's a last time buy, you need to get yourself on that queue ASAP and get as many components as you can to tide you over until you get to the point where you've respan another board with new devices. Okay, so just a few pointers there. So, as I say, it does cost the industry millions of dollars, pounds, euros in redesigning each year. So just be really mindful of this when you're designing new products, boards. So looking at the design from production point of view and the availability and lead times, and again, second sourcing, which we mentioned recently, just be aware really your standard lead times. I think a lot of people that I've come across are very unaware that actually a standard lead time can be as long as 18 weeks, right? So you could have designed your board, it goes to production, you might have to wait 3 months for the first lot of components, right? That's not uncommon. So try to avoid exotic components. And when I say exotic components, these are sort of non-run-of-the-mill devices from kind of the key global manufacturers. So they might be smaller component companies. It can be quite dangerous to design in some of those devices if there's a limited supply chain and limited alternative options. Stick to those credible, well-known brands where you can. And when it comes to buying, it's always good to work closely with a contract manufacturer if you can. But when you are buying devices, there's a lot of components out there on the grey market that are counterfeit. So when you're starting to buy devices for your prototypes even, just be really careful where you get those devices from, because they might say they're a specific device with a specific speed grade or temperature, and they're not. Or they might be even blank underneath. You know, there's been lots of incidences where somebody buys a component and it's a semiconductor and actually it's just a blank chip, there's nothing in it, right? So just be really careful of that. So use sources like RS components from us, right, for your prototypes. And when you're going into kind of pre-production or production stages, always try and work with franchise distribution where you can, or if not, you know, work with a contract manufacturer who's reputable and can help you make sure that you get the right components. Now, when those CEMs are also buying the components, it's also not uncommon for them to try and find shortcuts and cost cuttings by putting in alternative devices. Again, that can cause problems, especially if you're running high frequency circuits and they're not using quite the right crystal, or they might be using capacitors or resistors that are they're just not the same specification that you're using on your design, and they can cause all kinds of problems when it comes to certification. And so just being really mindful of that. Make sure you work very closely with your CMs to make sure you get those devices you specified, and if they do want to swap something out, make sure you understand exactly what it is and why they're doing it. And I think something that Julia might come on to again in a minute, actually, you know, staying on shore for your prototypes and your pre-production is a really good thing to do if you can. It's not always the best to go straight out to China and start trying to build there at your prototypes. It's, you know, staying on shore gives you more control, you're closer to it, and any problems that come up you can fix a lot quicker. So, but I'm sure Julia will come to that in her presentation. So let's look at around pricing. Now, again, pricing is a really important thing. Components in ones or twos, the price of those in thousands can be massively different. Okay, so when you're building your prototypes, make sure you understand your bill of materials and get costings for that in volume. So if you're only going to build a few hundred of these a year, probably doesn't make much of a difference. But if you're thinking about ramping up your board into thousands, then you really need to start going to look to see, you know, how much is my board going to cost me when I start building 5,000, 10,000 compared to when I'm building just 2, 3, or, you know, a few on a small production run. So RS and places like that are a great price indication for your, especially for your prototypes and low end volume. But when you start looking at the production volume and getting your costings together, you really, again, best to go to the franchise distributors. So if you designed in, let's say, a microchip or an SD micro, or go to the distributors who are franchised for those and start getting pricing from those guys, even if it's just budgetary, just to give you an idea about what that's going to cost you further down the line. Now, they are, again, they're quite crafty, some of these distributors. Be careful what I say, but they do run design registration schemes with suppliers. So they'll ask you lots of questions about your project when you're trying to get volume pricing. And that's good because it does unlock pricing at higher levels, but what it can also do is lock you into some of these distributors. So just be mindful of that. But it is a really good indication of when you're trying to look for components in that volume space, you can get a good grasp of what that's going to cost you further down the line. In terms of finding that volume pricing as well, actually, some of the manufacturers do list volume pricing, price breaks as a budgetary indication on their websites as well. So that's always good to go and have a look there, but, you know, do take them with a pinch of salt. They are often a great indication, but, you know, they're not gospel. So just be really, really mindful of that it's not an exact number. So just to sort of wrap up really, a lot of you might be in these early stages, you might be startups. I'm actually running a pilot program that we're trying to launch very soon to work with this design to manufacture concept, where you guys might have an idea that you've got together, you've got a very basic design put together, but you need that extra help just to sort of get it to a qualified design that we can get through certification. You might need help with the firmware. So if you're interested in being part of a pilot to go and see whether we can work with our third-party partners that we have, it is a chargeable service. But if you do need something to help you get from that prototype idea right through to a certified prototype, it's something we can potentially connect you with our partners on and help you through that. So just let me know if you want to take part in that, and we'll talk from there. So that's me, basically, in a nutshell. So I'm ready to pass over to Julia, and I'm happy to take questions, or we can do those at the end, no problem. So, Alistair, back to you.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for that. Thanks for your perspectives. And yet we'll cover those questions at the end, but please do keep them coming in. I've noticed a fair number coming through on the Q&A box, and I've also noticed that some of our panelists are already beginning to answer them, which is great. We absolutely encourage them to do. So that's brilliant. We may return to those later on. So now we're going to move on to our final speaker. So that's Julia Moore from Reshoring UK. And I can see Julia is now just getting her slides set.
Just get it. There we go. So, starting at the wrong place. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm going to go back. Sorry, just let's do that.
That's okay. This is the joy of online meetings.
Yes, it is, isn't it? There we go. Get into the right place would help, wouldn't it? Okay.
Yeah, here we go.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Ali. Okay, yes, I'm Julia Moore. I'm actually a CEO of the GTMA, which is representing the precision engineering and, in particular, the tool-making industry. And back in 2017, GTMA set up Reshoring UK, and we now have 24 engineering trade associations representing such industry sectors as composites. We've got the coatings people, we've got the Rail Forum, the BPF, that have joined this network of companies. So these are trusted and validated companies that work within these different industry sectors. The other aspect is that we have now located with sector organisations such as the Rail Midlands Forum Group, the health tech people, aerospace, and with the FAC and others, and indeed the automotive industry. So you can see that we're building up not only the engineering processes, but also the sector companies who would bring in the primes and tier one companies. In addition, on the left-hand side, you'll see that the catapults, the high value manufacturing catapult, indeed WMG, and the Advanced Forming Research Centre up in Strathclyde have all been very supportive in helping with a funding process through Innovate UK to develop the search facility on the reshoring network. What I want to now show you is sort of just to talk about the size of the SME community, because that is really a very important one. As you can see, 60% of the working population is an SME. And if you can see on the right-hand side, we've got the sizes of the business from the single enterprise, which is sort of nearly 4.5 million companies, or individuals in this case. You've got the 1 to 9, the micros and the small companies. Now that goes to make up an enormous part of the 5.9 million businesses in the UK, of which, interestingly enough, 2.4 million were businesses that started up since the millennium. Only approximately 7.5 large businesses, which is only equivalent to 0.1% of the business population, make up our over 250 employee companies. And then you track down and you've got just over 35,000 medium-sized businesses in the band, as you'll see, of 50 to 250, with 0.6 of the business population. Then you get to this quite large figure of 5.82 million small businesses who make up the remaining 99.3% of the total business population. And looking closer at these figures, I think you may be interested to know that 1,155,000 micro businesses employ between 1 and 9 employees. And coupling that together with the 4.5 million businesses, which are single enterprises, you get to see that this means that 95% of businesses in the UK employ fewer than 10 people. Linking on from that, so we've established that the SME community, especially the small businesses, are so important, but very often not found by the manufacturers. And this is an interesting poll that was carried out by the engineer just between the 28th of April and the 4th of May this year, which identified that from that poll, 59% of individuals believed that this crisis of the COVID-19 triggered a UK-wide reshoring strategy. And of that, a further 39% said that reshoring should focus on critical suppliers. And I think that's very true, because we all heard about the PPE, the issues that were surrounding that. And indeed, we at the GTMA were working on the UCL non-invasive ventilator that was really that the SME community stepped up to the plate. And why was that? Well, I think that quite honestly, the SMEs form a very crucial part of the UK economy. And the issue here is that the manufacturers had lost sight of their UK supply chain. And I think that was the danger that threw up suddenly this interest in reshoring. To look at how reshoring works on the website, it can locate companies throughout the UK and Northern Ireland by its postcode. You can search by categories and subcategories. It can be regional, or it can be Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. And we also have on that is the excellent free word search for products and services. It provides a direct link to each company within a trade association, and that company's website is highlighted on the profile page that is held on Reshoring UK. So there you have a complete picture of that company, not having to go back and forwards. You can see the profile, you can find the company by the region, etc. And it is all those members are represented through their membership organisation. And that ensures integrity and sustainability of the data, because it's always changing, it's a constant change, and that's a very important part of the reshoring network. And it also gives you clarity of content, so that the search is easy to find, you've got everything to hand, and you can revisit the page of that particular search. You may be looking for heat treatment, and you can find companies throughout the UK, or you could regionalise it. This is the website, and if it doesn't take too long to connect, but I can also tell you that the Made Smarter and the SMT all were involved in talking about reshoring in 2017 and 18. And reference was made to the disruptive technologies, digitalization, and manufacturing technologies to make it more viable to have localized, flexible manufacturing closer to their market, bringing about shorter lead times. So this is the website, very, very quickly, show you the categories that you can click on. You can go to castings and forgings, that will throw up the subcategories that you could look for, non-ferrous. You could go and look throughout, say England, and search for non-ferrous in England. And that will throw up the page, which will give you some of these companies in here. And just very quickly to show a point.
Sorry, Joey, just to very briefly interject there, we're not seeing the website on our screen at the moment.
Oh, you're not? Okay,
No.
thank you for telling me.
No problem.
Even though I am. That's strange, isn't it? Okay, beg your pardon. Let's
No problem.
that then.
Plenty of time.
That's not to worry. Right, I don't know whether this is going to work. Does it not come through, even though it...
I think you just need to press play on the presentation.
Oh, I did. That's what I saw. Yes, it was visualizing. I don't want to waste too much time, obviously, on that.
If you try, sorry, Jill, if you put it on.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I've gone onto the slide.
And just try one more time. Hopefully,
yes, that's what we.
That's it. Perfect.
It should come up now. It did come up.
It did come up, but it's just switched back. There might be a little bit of a lag in what you're seeing.
Oh, yes. Oh, I see. I shouldn't have clicked it. I should have just left it then. Beg your pardon.
No problem.
All right.
That is the real one because I can see the world going around. Okay. Can you see it?
Nope.
No, not at the moment.
There is a lag, isn't there? Oh, what a shame.
Maybe I think you're sharing your PowerPoint rather than your desktop. I think maybe we're seeing a different screen from you. We're still on your PowerPoint slides.
Oh, are you? Oh, yeah. Let's have a look.
Perhaps if you...
Hold on. Is that it? Let's have a look.
If you stop sharing your screen and then reshare your browser screen.
That's a PowerPoint. Is that it?
That looks good.
That's it. Thank you, Ali. Thank you.
No problem.
Is that going? Yes?
It is, yes. The world is turning.
Yeah,
The world is turning, yes. Very good. Okay, so there's composites. We go into Scotland and we search for composites. Obviously you can click that. And then what comes up is the composite companies that are in membership of Composites UK that are shown in Scotland. If I click here on a company, this will give a very brief, I think, outline of that company, but that you can click on their company website. They're not restricted, incidentally, on the profile that they have on reshoring. It's just a question of what the trade association has on their member. But behind it, obviously, is their own website. So going back, you can see that, it's a bit slow, that company that we've looked at has changed the locator, and you can then go on and interrogate. But in addition to that, we have the search, which will view the results as a list. And by going down there, you can see these companies, and you can do the same here. You can go into the company. If you choose the list option, you can see the association and you can see their website as well. The other aspect of reshoring, and it goes back to finding that company, provides also the sector link. So we've got the sectors here. For instance, we've got the rail industry, and you can view companies within as it happens, the Rail Forum Midlands, and you can view their members going onto here. Don't forget, this is Midlands, so it's, even though it seems to be quite a lot of companies in different areas, and just one up in Scotland, just for interest. So we'll have a look at this one. Oh, there we go. So this has WebTech on there as a member of the Rail Midlands Forum. So we've also got, as another sector, the health tech, as I've mentioned. We've got FAC that is just about to be loaded their data, and that's the Farnborough Aerospace. And we indeed will be speaking, and we are speaking to other aerospace, automotive. We've got the Welsh automotive people. So that really gives you a very quick overview of the reshoring network, where you can find these companies quite quickly. You can also do a quick word search. Going back to reshoring, the home page. Is it going? Yes, it is. So for instance, we'll just try this because it's the heat treatment. You can put other, obviously, search facilities in there as an independent, because you're going to then look across the whole of the UK for any company that mentions heat treatment in their text on that profile, will be thrown up on that. We're trying to encourage companies to write more keywords. That's quite important, obviously, for that search. There they are. These are the companies that actually are doing that. So just returning now to the PowerPoint to conclude. So as this network grows, and it really demonstrates the skills and innovation that sit within the SME community in the UK. And I think manufacturers have recognised over the last 3 months, if not longer, a lot of them, that dual sourcing in the UK is very important to reduce the impact of what we've just been through with COVID-19. But also, there is also the carbon footprint that is also making companies, manufacturers consider the UK for going forward and finding networks. I know J-Bal from meeting him at WMG some time ago when we were talking about the reshoring network with WMG, the AFRC as well. So, you know, thank you very much for the opportunity of a whistle stop through Reshoring UK, and we look forward to perhaps more discussions on manufacturing and how we can all develop the supply chains better location with manufacturers in the future. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Julia for that, and particularly for the demonstration of what is undoubtedly a very valuable tool. Don't worry at all about the connectivity and IT issues. There'll be plenty of people at home will be sympathising entirely with that. It's what we're having to try and deal with now for the first time in a while. So we're going to now move on to the Q&A part of today. Just before I do, it's also worth pointing in the direction of the chat functionality as well. There's all sorts of information and links that are being inputted there. So a lot of the stuff that's being talked about through our 3 panelists today, you'll have, as I say, the links and information to support that. Another thing, because we often get asked about the slides from the presenters, the slides themselves will not be made available, but as you might have noticed, this session is being recorded, and we do give attendees access to those recordings. They will go up online through the KTN and Product Design Scotland websites as soon as we can get them up, really, basically. So, okay, so moving on to questions now. I've had a number of questions come through. I've noticed that panelists have been answering those as they've come in, which is great, but we will return to a few of them. So Jay, if I could start with you, we had a question around the issue of non-disclosure and manufacturers perhaps being less inclined to sign such things. Is that something that you've noticed in your experience? And if that is the case, do you have any advice as to how you might deal with that particular scenario?
Yeah, kind of my experience is that not so much manufacturers, quite often the people with the ideas or the product idea, they're the ones who are sort of keen on non-disclosure. And then I think that getting the manufacturer to sign it depends on the approach. So I would suggest that if you go along with a partner, you know, the KTP network or an SME support team or something, then they have much more clout than you as an individual to be able to go and negotiate NDAs, and probably they have kind of more standard ones. So you might be better off signing one with one of the support partners and then using them to engage with suppliers. That's one of the things I would recommend that would simplify the whole journey.
Sure. Okay. No, that makes sense. And I'll stick with you, Jay, just now, although I think this question will also feed into Pete as well. As a supplier, it's one of our audience members is asking around advice on, I guess, obtaining pricing and quotations from suppliers when you're not necessarily at the stage to be placing an order. In all honesty, you know, you're perhaps still at the point of developing your business case. You may be thinking about developing a prototype, perhaps. But obviously you're not there to waste anyone's time. But how would you kind of maintain that balance, short of just lying, of course, but how would you maintain that balance within that conversation?
Again, I think for me, a lot of it depends on the kind of level of clout that you have with it. And again, if you're like a micro business and you want to increase your level of clout, then you go with a support partner. So for example, we get quite a few companies coming along with our SME team to help them in that process. So it's a difficult one, but I think you can get rough pricing from looking at the kind of standard components that are available and understanding what the kind of level of price is approximately. You should be able to build a bill of materials with approximate pricing from that knowledge.
Pete, I wonder if I could extend that to you as well. I'm sure you might have you've experienced this many times before, I'm sure. So from your perspective, how is that dealt with?
Yeah, I guess it depends on, again, you know, the size of your opportunity. A bit like Jay was saying, I think it's about, you know, your clout. I mean, if you're working with a contract manufacturer, generally they have got lots of inroads into different suppliers and they've got their preferential pricing and they can get discounts and stuff like that. You know, so if you're talking just about a regular production volume, you know, a few hundred boards or a couple of thousand boards, that's definitely the best route. If you've got like you're a startup and your potential behind it is like hundreds of thousands of devices and stuff, then it's always good to try and negotiate some of that pricing with the manufacturer directly where you can, or the big distributors. But for most people, I think, yeah, if you haven't got the experience and know where to go, if you're working with a contract manufacturer who's reputable and credible, you know, they will have their routes to finding the best deals for you, working with various partners. I mean, RS Components, for example, we have a whole network of CEMs that we're preferred partners with, and we give preferential pricing. Same with some of the distributors for the standard components. So yeah, it really does depend on where you are in your cycle of manufacturing and the size of your opportunity at the end of it. So it does vary.
Yeah, and that plays perfectly into another question which we had around that. So, you know, where manufacturing is outsourced, the question is asked: is it best to discuss pricing with suppliers directly, or let the contract manufacturers lead on that?
Yeah, again, I think from my perspective, for electronic components, again, it depends on the volume. But, you know, if you are doing a volume, if you've got a volume project opportunity, then get that pricing negotiated directly with the supplier, say the silicon supplier, or the distributor that you're working with. Or if you're just, you know, it's a much smaller thing that you're doing, let the contract manufacturer manage the whole process. They will manage everything for you. But where you can influence and get that better price and get that registered to you, go and work directly with the supplier to get that price put into the contract manufacturer. So it really does depend on what you're doing.
Okay. Julie, if I come to you next, because I was very interested in, and I think there's been a lot made on the opportunities for kind of, I guess, localization of the supply chain as a result of what's been going on in the last 3 months. It's really brought that into focus. And you've talked a little bit about some of the work that you've done and the data that you've gathered on that. Is there any sense that opportunity, if you like, I guess there will be, but I'm wondering if there's any evidence to suggest how sector specific that is, and if there are specific sectors that are more inclined to move in that direction, if you like, or are better set up, or in that sense, or do you find this is a broader approach?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting with the automotive industry. We've already got evidence with Aston Martin. In fact, we listened to one of their webinars that was in conjunction with Bosch. These companies are looking, certainly Aston Martin are looking at dual sourcing in the UK, and also the fact that he mentioned reshoring. Bosch have, that's the boiler people are looking at other technologies as well, and other products that they could go into. We've got the hydrogen situation, the hydrogen fuel cells, which we're very interested because we've set up a rail cluster group. And we see that obviously the aerospace industry will be having its own issues. And cross-industry knowledge transfer is a very important part of what we are known in the UK. We're quite a flexible at the bottom end of that supply chain. And I think that's a very important aspect to consider. SMEs work across sectors. Manufacturers tend to be within a sector. So with the manufacturers starting to look at doing different things or doing it in a different way, the encouragement there is that they recognize the benefits of flexibility for the UK industry can supply them with.
Okay, and I'm aware there's only 3 minutes left, and this next question is a bit of a 1 hour panel session in of itself, if I'm completely honest. But the question came into to Jay specifically, but I suspect that everybody on the panel will have an opinion. And it was really around this kind of broader concept of the relative pros and cons of manufacturing in the UK versus offshore. So Jay, the question came to you, but I'll maybe ask everybody to do a very brief comment on it. So if it is in any way possible to reduce answers down to about 30 seconds each, that would be tremendous. But Jay, if I could start with you to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, originally, my background is kind of manufacturing and engineering, but more in recent years, I realized actually those are less important in terms of success of a business. And I would say it's really dependent on your marketing strategy. Now, for some kinds of products, saying that you are manufacturing in the UK is a strong USP for that product. So we've done tests where, for example, same product with .co.uk compared to a .com, the sales increases in the order of 5 or 6 times. So I would say first look at your marketing strategy and decide whether the elements of the product are going to benefit from a UK strategy or not going to be affected by it. That's not the normal kind of answer, but I think in the end, it's about product market fit. It's about how close what you're providing is to the customer's expectations, and that's driven by their desires. And how important that is should be, the choice is driven by your marketing strategy, in my opinion. Okay,
thanks, Jess. An interesting perspective. Pete, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess my comment on that is, onshore is always good if you can do it. It saves a lot of complications, I think, especially in the early days when you're doing your pre-production, your early production runs, doing it close by where you can go and solve the problems when they arise and you're more in control with maybe the supply chain and stuff is definitely a benefit. And then when you've locked that design down and it all works, and then maybe you want to start building hundreds of thousands and millions, and yeah, maybe go offshore to somewhere like China. However, I don't know whether you're aware, but actually RS Components is one of the companies that builds the Raspberry Pi here in the UK. So you can actually build things in volume at a price point that is still, achievable to the consumers that are buying it. So it really does depend on what you're doing. But I'm a big advocate of building at home if you can, and when it makes sense, then yeah, maybe do it elsewhere. But there's lots of pros and cons to each situation, I guess, and yeah, that's my kind of take on it.
Cheers, Pete. And Julie, I'm sure we'll have something to say on this as well.
Well, yes, I mean, we've lost our industry because of manufacturing disappearing across on, you know, looking for cost down all the time. But even they at times have run into issues, and I would say that it has to be a mixture. We can't do everything, and we wouldn't expect to do everything here in the UK, but certainly some of these areas need to be addressed on dual sourcing. I emphasize that because the manufacturers, I think, would actually agree that the shambles that we had at the beginning of these last 3 months has demonstrated that. The other aspect is that we need to protect our skills, our innovation, otherwise we won't have any manufacturing here. And, you know, now is a great time. Exchange rates, etc., however fluctuating they are, but also, you know, the carbon footprint, I emphasize, the flexibility, the innovation that sits in the small industries that are set up, that have grown enormously. You know, the single enterprises have grown by the greatest amount from 2000 to 2020 by 80%, rough figure, don't quote me on that, but it's around about 80%, whereas the medium-sized companies have grown by 30% over that period. That's an indication how much we've got here of the innovative skills that the single enterprises can actually offer. And so, you know, do keep on with that. We're always here to assist, and that is a very important part. And we do it because we want to help manufacturers get what they want. And if we know where these companies are, that really helps. So the more and more organizations that we can get to join, we spread out the UK. Finally, just to say that Invest Northern Ireland are joining, and that will bring in aerospace, space, defence and electronics in the first tranche. And also we've got the Rail Industry Association, which will link up and will be within the sector with the Rail Forum Midlands area. So we're building up these stronger networks.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. I realise that was quite a tricky question to end on, so I appreciate you keeping your answers as concise as you were able to do there. That was quite impressive. And thanks more generally for your presentations today and for your engagement with the Q&A. And thank you to those at home who submitted questions, and thanks for being with us. Today, as usual, we didn't get through all the questions. We very rarely do, but what we will do in those situations is try and follow up where possible, and work with the panelists to get an answer to you. Hopefully you'll be able to connect with them individually now through the links that were provided, and I'm sure, you know, tools like LinkedIn, etc. can help with that. But that brings to an end the Q&A. I'm just going to hand you back now to Daisy to very briefly close today's sessions. But thanks again.
Brilliant, thank you all. There's also a series of Manufacturing Made Smarter ISCF briefing events I'd just like to very quickly draw your attention to, which focus on the supply chain, which you can see on the slide now. Please do get in touch with the KTN manufacturing team if you have questions or project ideas that you would like help with. Of course, I'd like to thank you all for your participation today. I think we can all agree that we had some amazing speakers. It was a really fantastic and fascinating topic. And I do very much encourage you to sign up to the future events. The next one is coming up next Wednesday. For any questions, I would strongly encourage you to contact the manufacturing team through Dr. Abby Hurd, whose email address I'm hoping you will be able to see in the chat / links through to the manufacturing team. And again, just thank you very much to all of our attendees, all of our participants, and hope to see you at the next one.